And if you've been using Claude lately, you probably know how you just seem to run out of credits so quickly on this thing. And a lot of that is by design, simply because there's a lot that goes up into each one of the things you're putting into Claude. Unlike ChatGPT, which tends to be quite simple in what it sends up to the cloud and then brings back, Claude has a lot more going on behind the scenes you're probably not aware of. So I'll share my screen and we'll get started. And I'll also be doing some live demos on real live Claude to show you what I mean. And one particular mode I've used, which has been surprisingly useful at helping to bring down my usage, because I've been trying to use the whole Fable update, and which has now come back. If you were not watching the news, that went away and now it's come back. And you use that really quickly, and I wanted to not use it up as quickly, so I found a little bit of a trick that someone recommended to me. So first off, we all hate the notice and it comes up. It says pay your subscription. You sit down with a real problem, and then 3 messages in, you're just going, how am I already out of usage on Claude? And Claude's telling you to come back in a few hours, right? So usually what it is, it's like, oh, upgrade your plan, add more usage credits, all that kind of thing. The other standard advice that people give you is just use it less, become less dependent on these tools. But you're paying for this stuff, right? Well, even if you're using it free, this is going to benefit you in some way. Although I must admit, though, on those high-end models like your Opuses and Fable, you're not going to get a lot of usage out of a free one anyway, but you will get a little bit more out of it with some of these tricks. The truth is that both of these kind of approaches, the whole upgrade your plan or use it less, misses the point entirely. It shows like a fundamental misunderstanding about how all these AI tool works, especially in the case of Claude, which seems to be far less generous with what it gives you for your money. Now, there's a bit of a strange fact that nobody really looks into, which is that Claude actually goes and rereads your entire threaded conversation every single time you hit send. This is very common in most of them as well, but it depends on what model you're using, whether you're using Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, of how much of a context window that it will read. In the case of ChatGPT, it's about 256 meg through to about 500,000, which is a fairly big amount. In Claude, it's like 1 million tokens. Now, tokens will understand very, very shortly what that exactly means. What it means is, though, that every time you put a message in and you get a response back, it's reading through everything you've written prior. And that could be, if you've been doing the same thing on and on and on again, that you could be putting up so much information and bringing it down that you're using up all your allowance very quickly because everything's too complex that you're trying to get it to do each time. What it means is that when you have message 50 that you send up, it's reprocessing all the messages from 1 to 49 first before it actually gives you your answer back on message 50. So if you're just sort of tagging more on at the end, what you're doing is wasting more tokens, because you're not just sending the token up that says, hey, answer this. It's saying, hey, answer this, and also read everything else that's on here again and put it back up there and bring it back down. And when you understand the usage of tokens, you'll understand why that uses it up so quickly. Because without exception, every time this has here, it's how the system works, because it works on context. All these systems do, particularly in each chat. So the cheapest way to do this is to start a new chat every time, so it's not referencing all that past material. But Claude does get its referencing from a lot of different places, and it's not just from the chat you're having right then and there. It's in other areas like memory and custom instructions, and we'll have a look at what they mean shortly, because they're hidden all over the place. Now, tokens, to understand how that works is what the real currency of any sort of AI system is. And Claude doesn't count things in terms of like message up, message down. It counts these tokens, which are little chunks of text that are around about 3/4 of your average sort of length of word each. So in a very long word, you might have 2 to 3 tokens. A very short word, you might have half a token. A 10-page report would have about 5,000 tokens, for example. A big rambling thread that you've gone on and added more and more and more in there, that could be tens of thousands without you even noticing. And what happens is every token gets processed again every chat you have. So if you've got a long, big chat there and you put another message in, like I said before, it's not just processing what you just asked, it's processing what you just asked, plus everything in that chat before it, up to 1 million tokens. It's crazy how much is in there. It's also when you start doing things like coding, you start to realize how quickly those tokens add up because it starts to do this whole thing. Oh, okay, we've run out of memory. So what you're going to have to do now is compress that chat. And that can happen when you're coding two or three times and you realize, have I actually used over 3 million tokens so far? Wow, that's why my usage is going so quick. So you understand tokens now? This is how they actually work. You have a 5 hour session window and you have a weekly cap and you've got a number of short messages per session in that 5 hours you can do. So sometimes that's in the free version, sometimes in the paid version. If we look over, I'm going to quickly pop over into Claude myself now so we can see, have a look at that. Let me just I think I just wiped out my entire background altogether. So let me just go back to where I was and reshare that. What we've got here is the ability to be able to, I'm not sharing the right screen here. Sorry about this. Sometimes screen sharing on Zoom just completely befuddles me. No matter how many times I use it, it just completely drives me crazy. Okay, so we'll go back to a new chat in Claude here, for instance. So what I can check is in my usage, which is down the bottom left under your profile, and in settings. And then we're looking under usage, which is just here, usage. And under usage, you'll see in my current session, because I've been using Claude this morning, I've used 8% of my token usage. And I'm using a max plan, so I'm paying about 150 bucks a month. So it's a lot because I do a lot on here, right? So I've got about another 2 hours and 53 minutes to use up 100%. I'm fine. I'm not going to use all that. There are some days where I do though, and it does could boot me out and makes me come back again. What it then breaks down is with all the models here, it's telling me that I've used 10% of those over that whole weekly limit. All right. And then Fable specifically, I've used 2% of my allowance this week. So I can go and do a lot more Fable. The problem is that Fable gets used a lot quicker, and I'll show you just how quick soon. I've also got some other things I've got here. So for instance, I've got a $97.50 current balance that I've got in there. So if I go over my limits, I've got $97.50 to use, and then it can automatically go and start topping up my account with more credits if I need them. Naturally, I don't just use these on silly things. I'll do them on things which are actually making money for me. But you get an idea of this is how you sort of gauge that usage. So I've got plenty of room left in the next few hours, so I don't really have any problem there. I only use 10%. I use Claude Cowork just shortly, which is what probably used up most of that 10%. So that gives you an idea of how they kind of work. Back here, though, your habits are going to decide which part of the range you live at. And if you're using the free version, this is going to look really different to you because you're going to see, it's like, I'll do a refresh here. It's not going to show anything much different. No, it's all the same. What you're going to see in here is that this line at the top here on the all models is going to go up really quickly. Fable, you may not even get access to it as a free user at all. And then your weekly usage is going to come up really quick as well. So on free, you're going to run out of usage very quickly. Every time you get on there, pretty much, it's going to ask you to come back in 3 hours to have another crack. So you're going to have to be really, really efficient with what you're doing. But what does efficient look like? Well, you've got to understand how expensive our habits tend to be on Claude and other AI tools. They tend to be really expensive because, like, you could have one giant conversation that never ends. And this is kind of how we were taught in the very early days of ChatGPT of how to use Claude. It was about putting in as much as you can in the beginning and getting the best result out of it and continuing to refine and iterate until you get that perfect response. That is really expensive, a way to do it because it's dealing with lots and lots of threads. In early ChatGPT, you didn't have a lot of token usage for everything. It was pretty small. The actual models themselves didn't use a lot of tokens. Now they are way more complex and use a lot more, which is much more expensive to compute. These things don't make enough money to pay for themselves. So how Claude's handling that is they're making a user pay system so that makes sure that you pay for what you're using, not just sort of paying for a subscription and getting unlimited usage. So one giant conversation that never ends. It could be brainstorming Tuesday, a tricky email on Thursday, something unrelated on Sunday, all within that same thread. What you think is happening is one big, tidy, giant place for everything. It's all efficient and organized. But what's actually happening is every old exchange you had about brainstorming on Tuesday comes up to something unrelated on Sunday, and it's sending all that information back up in tokens. So instead of you using one sentence worth of tokens, let's say perhaps, I don't know, 12 to 20 tokens, you're using thousands of those things at once. So what you got to do is get out of each chat and start a new one every time. That's the most basic way to handle this. One of those expensive habits is also when you're drip feeding in some context. So you're sort of going, oh, help me with my marketing. And then you then clarify, it asks you to clarify your goals and your audience. So it's using help me with my marketing. Let's say it's about 20 tokens. First clarify, ask for goals and audience. Okay, it's going to come back with another 40 tokens. You put in another 150 tokens worth of detail. It comes back. And what it's doing, it's adding all this up. So the whole conversation to the initial 20, the next 40, the next 150, and it keeps going on and on and on. So asking really vague questions is actually costing you more than just simply putting a lot more context in the opener. So the short, lazy opener is probably the most expensive message you're going to send all week because it requires it to keep coming back to you. And how that works is every time you're vague with an opening, it has to come back and ask you for some kind of clarification, or it's going to do something that it thinks is right, but then you go, that wasn't what I was meaning, but you didn't give it any context, anything more than just a vague message to get it to understand what you want. So every time it comes back to you, that's another lot of tokens. And depending on how it talks to you, it's going to come back. Like I'll have a practice. So a vague one for me could be going in and opening up a new chat and saying, I want help with learning Spanish. So it's going to come back. So I want help with learning Spanish. Use a certain amount, like maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tokens has gone up there. It's thinking now. So each one of these things here is coming back with tokens. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 tokens just in there. Now, what I've done in here, I'm using a mode that I put into my instructions called caveman mode. So it goes good goals, Spanish useful, few things help me aim right. So that's now asking me questions. But what it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 tokens plus 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. 31 tokens came back. So I thought I'm being very efficient by asking one small question, but it's come back with nearly 40 tokens worth of stuff. So it's starting to use up those tokens really quickly as well. But your Claude probably doesn't talk like this, right? Mine talks like this because I've given it a very special set of instructions to come back and be very, very blunt and not wordy. And this is all in the settings down here, back in my settings. And what you got here is instructions for Claude. And I've said, you are caveman, talk like caveman, drop filler words, articles, and pleasantries, use short synonyms, be direct, communicate substance, few word, do trick. So I've given it an example of what caveman is. So what it does every time, it does that. Now, if you have extra instructions you want to put in there, such as, don't use M dashes, don't use this, you can add those as well. But just recognize that every time you send a message through Claude, it also references all this. So even in there, I've had to do really, really like very, very little in there because I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31 tokens just in those instructions. And every time I talk to Claude, it's using those 31 different tokens every time as on top of what I'm doing. So it's adding more to it, but it's also saving me a lot because what generally comes back from Claude is quite chatty and quite friendly because most of the time We've got, this the voice language, the style, this buttery style, mellow, airy, glassy, rounded. So this is all to do with how it's going to speak to you, and also, you're making sure that's in the style of the voice. So if you're using voice mode, that's even more tokens yet again. So when you're using voice mode, that's where things get a bit messy. I tend to use not voice mode, but the chat dictation, but that's a very different thing. Again, when you're using that, that's using more and more tokens again. So when you start to think of in the efficiency of your tokens, you go, okay, zero, some basics, can chat, want better. It's nice and short. Normally, Claude would stretch that out over 10 or 12 words per line on there. So it's actually using more and more and more tokens. So I'm just trying to cut those down just that little bit to help it go a bit easier. So that's caveman mode. So just to have a quick another look at that so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. It's this here, you are caveman, talk like caveman, drop filler words. I probably don't even need you are caveman. I just need talk like caveman, and that will be enough. And I can save that in place, and it's going to continue talking to me like a caveman. You may not like it talking to you like a caveman or a cavewoman, but in me, I don't care. I just want to get the work done. And I want to be as usefully efficient with my tokens as I possibly can be. So what you do really don't want to do, this drip feeding in of context isn't how you work. What you do in this Spanish thing is that you would start off with a lot more context up front, which is using more tokens up front, but it's less of that backwards and forwards. It won't need as much clarification, which means that I might use 2,000 tokens on my input, but it's not going to come back with 4,000 tokens worth of clarification because I'm using caveman mode and because it's needing to come back to me less. So you've got less back and forth, less tokens, you get to use the thing for longer. So that's getting a bit more out of it. The other way is like re-uploading files within the one conversation. This is where you might have a brand guide that you're loading up and say, here's my brand guide, work within this, let's go. And you're thinking, great, this is a good way. I'm going to have this nice and contextual and all that. And you want to keep going across conversations. Look, there's a much better answer to this is using projects, because projects are the thing that's going to make it a lot easier. Another expensive habit is using the heaviest model for everything. So you'll notice here when we go back here, I'll start a new chat. You've got, it defaults to a certain model. For me, it's Opus 4.8 High, which is they're the highest model apart from Fable 5, which runs out tomorrow. So I better get some work done this afternoon using that. 4.8 is, go by the examples here. For complex tasks, having a brainstorm about what your marketing strategy will be sounds complex to us, but it's not actually that complex for this thing. This is for, I want to code up 3 different React-based web apps that do these things and these things and these things, plugs into Stripe, and then enables me to be able to take payments from clients, bookings through a calendar interface that also integrates through OAuth to my Google Calendar or something like that. That is a complex task. Writing a massive treatise with lots of different research that's going to come from academic sources, that could be complex. For most things, use Sonnet 5. It's going to use it at much less of what the Opus 4.8 is using. So default to Sonnet 5 all the time, unless you're doing quick question and answer stuff. Sonnet 5 will help you code. Sonnet 5 will help you brainstorm. Sonnet 5 will help you do almost anything you need to do without you having to do much of that stuff. Apparently my screen can't be seen as I talk. I'm not sure. It's all just black. Sorry, I'll just my screen sharing is really mucking up at the moment. Sorry about this. So I'll just reshare my screen and see what it does again. So let's go Google Chrome here. I might just do my whole screen. It might make it just a bit easier so you get to see me, and then we can go here. Let's see if this works now a bit better. Thank you so much, Jody, for pointing that out. Hopefully that's now coming up for you. Right, so the most heaviest model using for everything, if we look here at here, got Sonnet 5 is where you should be defaulting to. If Opus 4.8 is only when you're doing most people don't need 4.8 at all. We think, oh, yes, but it's going to write a nicer thing for me. It doesn't really. Sonnet 5 does pretty much everything. And Haiku 4.5 is for quick questions and answers. So if I'm going, what's the weather going to be like in Sydney tomorrow? Because I'm flying out to my flights to Darwin really early morning going via Brisbane. So I want to make sure there's not going to be any delays caused by weather. So really, it's a complex question, but it's actually quite simple because it's going to come back with Haiku really, really quickly, thinking about the impact, thinking about the weather conditions. Probably needs to think about Brisbane weather as well, because I've got to go through there. So 59 degrees, which is in that's in American style, but a 45% chance of rain. Look, it's nothing severe headed in. Flight should depart on time. So that's a really quick one. It's using far less tokens because there is a token budget for each of these kind of models from Claude, and it works kind of like this. Haiku down the bottom, you're probably never going to run out of that with simple basic backwards and forwards if you're on a paid model. You might run out on the free model, but it'll take you hours to run out because you're doing simple stuff. This is where you might want to do something with your own files. So you load up a research paper and you want to ask questions about it. That's pretty simple. So you might think that's really complicated, but it's not. That's just reporting and working with files. If you're Q&Aing backwards and forwards with someone, that's also really easy to do. Sonnet then uses 66% more than Haiku as a guide. So coding, writing, researching, pretty much the works. It's going to do a really, really good job of it. 4.8 is where you're doing very deep thinking, very creative writing that needs to be in a very specific voice and a very specific tone with lots of research going into it, complex coding and making web apps and websites and all that sort of thing. But it will use 66 more than Sonnet. So you're going to run out quickly. This whole Fable thing then uses twice as much as Opus. So you can imagine how quickly that runs out. So that gives you an idea then of how much each of these tools is using every time you do something. So fix one, and then two, use fresh threads and proper briefs. So first of all, a new chat comes with a new task. If you want to do something new, open a new chat. That will save you all that. So that will give you already a good win. Secondly, front load that opening statement you're making. Put as much context as you can into the opener so it doesn't have to keep coming back and asking you lots of questions, because it's not only then are you adding in the same amount of content, but you're also then adding to it every question that it has to ask you and all the thoughts it has to do. One dense brief going in replaces 6 to 10 scattered clarification questions. It's way cheaper, it's way faster. And if you're really, really concerned about the fact that you don't like typing, just do what I did and just feed it in via voice through the dictation button. You'll see that right here, the microphone there, not the voice mode. Voice mode is where you're having a conversation. We're just dictating here. So that's what we want. That will help you just to put it in really, really quickly. That's going to save you a heck of a lot of tokens. Fix 3 and 4, batch your questions together rather than 4 different questions about the one document. Ask 4 questions about the document in one thread. That way, bang, it's all out there. It has because remember, we're trying to avoid it coming back and asking more clarifying questions, or you having to put in a second question, a second question about the document with its second return back. And then bring very lean materials. Like, don't put in the 17,000 row spreadsheet. Clean up the data first before you put it in. So for instance, if you've got a membership database and you want to work with the active members, don't bring the whole database, which contains 70% inactive members. Just bring the 30% that are relevant. Bring that in and work with it, because again, it's working with all those bits of data in there. Every bit of that data is a token. So you're using more and more of those tokens all the time. And also, don't make it go to a website to get the details from a website. Just paste the text in from the website that you want to use, because when it goes off and finds it, it uses, you guessed it, even more tokens. So again, you become very token aware every time you're using this. For me, just using caveman mode saves me enough. I don't have to think too much about these ones here. But what I will do, though, is look at the data I'm putting in, because I use quite large database sets, which I'm using to sort things through, do a lot of anonymization in those first, of course, because you don't want to send, private information up to the cloud. But I'm doing that in a way which is going to save me as many tokens as possible. so I can use more of that Fable thing before it runs out tomorrow. Number five, use projects. Seriously, this is the best way of doing it because you can preload all your instructions, all your documents, all your reference materials into the project once, and then it caches that. It doesn't count against your limits when it's reused. So it has to keep going and getting that background from your projects, from your files, and from your your instructions. It doesn't actually, it doesn't charge you tokens for that. So if you go into, let's say, for instance, into one of my projects, let's just call it my Saturday sprint, which is my newsletter. So every time I do the Saturday sprint, I start here and it references this memory in here, which is all this information in here, which has been building over time. It references my instructions, all those instructions, and it references all of the source materials in which to write what I write every Saturday morning. It makes it much, much quicker for me. But what it's doing when I say start here and it starts that process, it's not sending all of that up first. It's using all that, but it's not sending it up. So it's not using the tokens of things that are already in here. It goes up, comes back, and then filters through locally in my project how to use that stuff and put it into context. Hard to explain, but this is by far the most efficient way you're going to use it is in these projects where you put all of your context for things you do frequently into this project. So in the case of instructions, how do you want your project to go? This one, my one's like a call and response. So it says, I open with start, and then it goes, it asks me, what is the subject? What is the main topic? It's got a sequence. So the rules here, I've got all the rules, the style of writing, even the use of things like M dashes. I don't really have those in there, but I usually would have things like M dashes, don't use them, that kind of thing. That's all in here. It doesn't count against your usage. What it does, the backwards and forwards you do in the chat will. So, for instance, in here, this is the example of how one of my projects will go. It's pretty long in 1 week. So it asked me question one, what topic? I put in the topic. Okay. Now it's going to send, I put that in, it sends that up, thinks about it, comes back, but it thinks about it against what's kind of stored, what it considers to be stored locally in that project. It doesn't send that up and then also send up all the backwards context at the same time. It only sends that up, brings back an answer, matches it with my context, and then delivers, okay, next thing, question two. So just use that because it won't count against your usage levels. It's going to be way more efficient to do that. Wow, it's like free lunch. It really is. Now, match the model to the job. If you're doing really, really super heavy stuff, and heavy is probably heavier than what you're probably doing, use Opus, maybe Fable if you've got access to it. But secondly would be the mid-tier Sonnet. Sonnet is where you're going to use most of your stuff. That's where you're going to use your things. Someone can't hear me. Sorry, I can't change that because that's at your end. My microphone's working, it's going out there. So if you can't hear me, that's I'd say because there's something wrong at your end there. Another question from Jody, which was woohoo. Oh no, okay, that's it. And sorry to the anonymous attendee, you can't hear me. I can't do anything about that from your end. Sorry. So with memory is not what you think it is. So memory and chat search are bridges between conversation. What this means is that the memory, which is existing in these projects. So if I go back to my project, you can see the memory here. This memory, it's the bridge between all this stuff in here and what I put over here. So this here, the memory, is like the condensed version of what it does with instructions and files. So it's much more efficient at sending all that back. So it's not what you think. It neither reduces or gets reread inside a long thread. A memory in, say, for instance, ChatGPT is the same thing. It doesn't get referenced in your usage. It just helps to actually make it quicker for it to bring back that information from you. Also, I'm getting lots of Q&As here. Sorry, I just can't keep up with it. That one also answered that one. Done. Thank you. And finally, just don't do those mega long threads. That's something you can do straight away. The mega long threads are what really wastes all that usage. Build in projects. load in your instructions, load in your reference material, let it do the heavy lifting so you're not using quite so many. And the free version of Claude is actually allowing you to use projects to a limited degree as well. So that is one way you can do it, especially if you're doing stuff that you're doing over and over and over again. Um, Before you set about just asking vague questions, use one brief that you put in that's quite comprehensive before you can then bring it back out, before you can send it up to the cloud. So rather than a very vague question, make that first question in a thread quite comprehensive. So it's got pretty much all of the contents it needs and all the context it needs to give you a great answer. And then check that usage guide in the settings. A reminder where that is down by your little logo there, up to settings, and then in your your usage. And that's where you'll see how your usage is sitting. So you'll be able to see just how much you are or aren't using. And that is pretty much it. If you want to keep on learning, everything I just talked about is in this free guide. You can find it at that address or through this QR code. They'll give you a bit of a clue on where to go, especially if you didn't quite hear me in this one, or if you missed some of those pieces where I was blanked out and I had the blank screen.